just as a brief introduction, Davide Guzzetti, he's coming on his third year pretty soon here. I mentioned earlier virtual reality and artificial intelligence, but another cool thing that he's been working on is satellite constellations and applying some of those ideas toward that. And so I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. And yes, but before we talk about some very recent adventure that we took on in exploring proliferated low Earth orbit satellites constellation and security aspects of these space assets, let me give you a brief introduction or a brief overview of the lab activities. And so looping back to some of what Brian said and our work on virtual reality and machine learning. So while my name is Davide, I graduated from Purdue, and my background is really in space system and astrodynamics. All the work that you will see today and all the success or progress that the lab had in these first 2 years, that wouldn't have been possible without the great students that I found here at Auburn. And so really, I just want to set that straight, that all that you will see today, it's mostly their merits, from PhD students to undergraduates, really across the entire curriculum. And again, what really my background is in astrodynamics, and in particular in trajectory design and 6 degrees of freedom dynamics in complex dynamical environments such as gravitational multi-body environments, that are those gravitational fields that originate from the interaction of multiple bodies. The most prominent example nowadays is the cislunar space. So trajectories that has been considered for the gateway, such as near halo, rectilinear halo orbits. Basically, that's what I did during my PhD. And together with that, the guidance and control of 6 degrees of freedom vehicles, as an example, solar sails. And I'll just take 1 minute of my presentation to advertise an event that is happening here well, it's virtual, but Auburn is one of the institutions leading this effort. And it's called AstroCamp. So it's something happening the second week of June. And what it really is, it's a crash course on those gravitational multi-body dynamics I just mentioned. So if you have interns, students, anyone that has basic orbital mechanics knowledge, but is not really familiar with all these most recent topics that really became popular when the Artemis program was launched at full force, this might be a good place to start. They're all virtual lecture, virtual content that will be accessible during those 2 weeks through the Auburn catalog. The commitment is very limited. We're talking about 10 hours a week, and we will also have social events. I mean, everything is going to be virtual, but we'll have synchronous events where the AstroCamp community can get together. So again, it's in the slide. I'm not sure if you will have the slide, but again, if you email me, I'll be happy to share this flyer with you. And now going into some of the things that I start doing when I arrive at Auburn, which was a great opportunity coming to this department to start experimenting with new ideas in astrodynamics. And one of these ideas is the application of immersive computing, and in the form of virtual reality, to develop new tools for astrodynamics and space mission design. What is playing here is a proximity flight simulator that one of our graduate students developed. And this is, I mean, obviously you are seeing a video here, but if you could come to Auburn, you will be able to see this into our virtual reality room. And so our goal here is not necessarily to develop at this point final products, but to experiment with ideas for new type of tools that then could help the industry, the agencies, or the community in general. Other ideas that we work with is the gamification of astrodynamics into a form that can be then tackled by artificial intelligence. And one of the form of artificial intelligence we work with is called imitation learning. And what imitation learning does, those are algorithms that take human experience, human knowledge, and try to transfer that to the machine. So what happened here is that students play this video game where and this ties back to, I guess, a little bit to what Toshi was presenting. A student piloted the spacecraft exploring a binary asteroid system, and we collected all those data and used that data to train an artificially intelligent engine that now took the place of the human in guiding the spacecraft. And this is early work. There are still several riddles that need to be figured out before this becomes fruitful, but these are some of the things we are exploring. And together with astrodynamics, we also look at early or designs or like concept design and feasibility studies. We just concluded a phase 1 study on the flat fabrication of progressively self-assembly space system. And this is a collaboration with another faculty here in the department, Russell Millen. And basically what the idea here was, it was to take these smart materials and see if you could utilize these materials to develop a very large interferometer. And the application was a science application, was for the study of the dark ages signal. And in this realm of feasibility studies, that's also where the Aero Astro Robotics Lab fall into place. Now, this is not strictly my research, but I think that they did some very cool work that I want to show. And so this is the drill that Brian mentioned earlier. And again, I'll take this to advertise that we're always looking for mentors. We just started. It was great that in 1 year we were able to land the final of the MMIP competition. But again, we're looking for mentors, fans, people that from industry that are interested in working with the students and maybe even participating to this competition. So if you have any of such interest, feel free to reach out to Brian or to me. And so after this relatively long digression, let's go back to the meat of the presentation and talk a bit about this new work that we start tackling on in the lab, which is understanding adversarial threats to proliferated satellite constellation. You might, I think you most likely are familiar with the idea. If you just think about Starlink, to mention one example of putting hundreds to thousands of low-cost satellites into space at an orbit altitude that is very low compared to previous communication satellites. And the idea is that with this many satellites, you are able to grant access to any location of the Earth at any time, either via, well, Starlink is an internet provider, so it would be an RF payload, but you could really envision any type of payloads that you could accommodate on these low-cost small satellites and realize omnipresence across the globe. And this is a great idea. Obviously, there are ways to interfere and to degrade the performance of these architectures, even if it's more resilient, even if this new paradigm is more resilient of previous one. And these are images that these are not from here, from the DIA report. And it's just to say that there are really different ways to bring down a satellite, or you probably don't even want to bring it down because that will trigger a series of other consequences, but there are more subtle ways to interfere with a satellite. And this is not necessarily what we are doing now. We are taking a bit of a broader view and conceptualizing the process. And so we are looking at the astrodynamics perspective. And so I'll just talk about a very simple problem just to highlight some of the challenge that might exist even if we have these very large constellations. And so if we take a polar orbit, so an orbit that is in a plane that is orthogonal to the equatorial plane, it's circular, just to simplify the dynamics, and we have a satellites going around, and underneath there is the Earth rotating, and there are two ground stations. One that is our ground stations that communicate to the satellites, and one that is perhaps the ground station of a bad actor, or I guess that embody some sort of interference happening sometimes along the orbit or starting from. And so what we look at was if the defender location is fixed and the attacker has the luxury to pick wherever a location around the globe where to start the interference or the attack to the satellites. And for us, it simply means that something has happened to the satellite. How long it will take to the defender to realize that something has changed with the satellite, or that it no longer has a satellite. And so this is a simple revisit time problem, essentially, between two different locations on the globe. And in this map, you can see different, the impact of different attack location on the satellites. From, obviously, if you start the attack, and blue region means that the defenders, it's able to realize that an attack has occurred with a very short time, and the yellow region represented are up of a 10-hour delay before the defender can communicate with the satellite again and realize that something is off. And so when you have this simple scenario, the patterns are relatively straightforward and could be explained by the rotation of the Earth and the orbital period. Other some interesting stuff start to emerging as the defender location move closer to the equation. Some very high revisit times start appearing in the form of bands. If the defender moves closer to the pole, that obviously this is not a surprising discovery. That's for a polar orbit. That's the best location for a defensive position, where the revisit times drops down to from 10 hours to a maximum of 1 hour. But where I'm trying to get at is when you have multiple orbits, when the orbits start to become inclined, these patterns start to become more complex, to the point where if you start adding defender locations, obviously you bring down the revisit time. And if you combine two defender locations with inclined orbits, so orbits that are no longer perpendicular to the equator, but that have some degrees inclination different from 90 degrees, then this complex pattern of revisit times start to form. And what is really interesting is that regions of high revisit time are adjacent to regions of with very short revisit time. So for an attacker, in proximity of these rims, it will be very easy to move his axis across the rim and deliver an attack that is has an impact of a completely different magnitude. And things start to become more complex. That when we partner with computer science here at Auburn and cybersecurity, and so we are taking care of developing low fidelity simulations because they run faster, for orbits, dynamics, coverage, all basically modeling the constellations. And then Dr. Daniel Tauritz in computer science is helping us to develop co-evolving AI agents that are able to find strategic optimal solution to these adversarial problems. And so as I said, and I'm gonna wrap this up, we are working on developing the framework, the constellation engines. So basically software that takes in number of planes, all the information on the orbits and satellites and compute coverage. And what our collaborator is doing is developing competitive coevolution algorithms, which are population-based heuristic optimization algorithms that co-evolve different AI agents, one for the attacker and one for the defender, where they compete, for example, in trying to maximize or minimize their revisit time. An example of what the output might look like is a population of defender and attacker, and that they evolve. Now, I'm gonna skip the details of this shop law, but I guess as you move from bottom to up, the attacker agent is becoming stronger, and as you move from left to right, the defender agent is becoming stronger, as measured on a fitness function that is user defined. And the cool thing about genetic approach is that you can either optimize the solution space, so find point solution, or you could also transform this into genetic programming, that you're no longer searching the solution space, but you're searching the programming space, which means that you're creating AI agents. You're not finding point to solution. You're creating software that, given sensory input, is able to output a strategy for you. And so very quickly, you can bring this to the next level, where we also develop more complex interface, such as that include more complex logistics, and then apply the same tool. We are not there yet, just to be clear, but we are working on that. And so thank you for your attention, and happy to take any question in this very last minute.
Thank you. When can we play that game?
Soon, I think. A first version of the game. And
I have a couple minutes for any questions that might be out there.
I had one quick question, Dr. Guzzetti. Do you see these low Earth orbit constellations as kind of a substitute for a lot of the big geosynchronous type operations and satellites?
Oh, that is an important question. I'll say I think they're complementary. I don't think they're going to replace all the capabilities.
Okay, thank you.
Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, the nice thing of geostationary is that you have a very broad access area, and so you need a comparatively relatively small number of assets. They become more costly, and ideally that will be a solution, except that then you only rely on this one asset that if you lose it, you lost it. And then that becomes a bit more into the fields where we start going behind my realm of expertise, but I will be very suspicious that there are sensing capability that are more optimally performing in geo environment than in LEO, or from the strategic point of view, I guess. And another into that is that if you look at the plans for example, the space development agents, the approach they're currently taking is a multi-layer approach, where different assets are located at different altitude with different functionalities.
Right.
Dr. Guzzetti, Greg Karahalis. Aside from conclusions related to the possibility in these complex attacker opportunities that you described, what are some of the recommendations that immediately come forward related to how a proliferated LEO constellation operator can take advantage of your research and defend themselves?
I think, well, there are, for example, one of the things that we are looking at, and maybe we can, is the location of ground station placement, as well as when to perform contact, or how to schedule, I guess, contact times. And I guess that's one of the questions we're trying to answer, but unfortunately we are not there yet that I could give you a recommendation. I don't feel comfortable enough to give you a recommendation, but one of the problems that we have identified is it becomes a sort of flip it game. How, when you have so many assets, how do you monitor them? How do you schedule your, because if you schedule things too regular, then it becomes too obvious for an adversary when is the right moment to perform an interference. And so you need to become a bit more strategic in the way the defender monitor the network. But we're not at the point that we can give recommendation yet.
Thank you, Davide, and thank you for the questions. And we do have to move on to our next speaker. So again, virtual applause.